You think she'll last the year? I doubt it. That's why we need everything signed now, before winter. I didn't mean to hear it. I was standing behind the shelf of breakfast cereals, holding a box of Raisin Bran and deciding whether I should try something new for once. The voices carried from the next aisle over. I wouldn't have paid attention if one of them hadn't been my son's. And if he hadn't said that. At first, I froze. My heart, which still beat steady for 78 years, suddenly felt foreign in my chest. The tone was too flat, too practical. He wasn't panicked or grieving, he was coordinating. I peeked through the narrow gap between shelves, and there he was, my son, Paul, with his always perfect shirt tucked in, nodding to someone on the phone. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that grief brings. The kind that comes from managing assets. She won't make it another year, he repeated. We've waited long enough. The medical excuse won't hold past spring. If she changes her mind, we're stuck again. I backed away before I could hear more. My hands were trembling. I left the cereal box in the cart and made my way to the checkout like nothing happened. I smiled at the teenage cashier, made small talk about the weather, signed the receipt, and drove home. Like I hadn't just heard my son talk about me like a dying investment. I didn't cry. I wish I could say I cried. That I had a dramatic breakdown in the car or screamed at the top of my lungs. But I just drove. Past the same hedges I trimmed myself. Past the white house with the blue shutters where I'd lived for 44 years. Past the mailboxes I helped my neighbors paint. And then I turned into my driveway and parked. It took me 3 tries to get the key into the front door. My fingers weren't steady yet. Inside, the house greeted me like always. The clock ticking above the mantel, the scent of lavender from the sachets I made last spring, the framed photos of Paul as a child, missing teeth and muddy shoes. A drawing from my granddaughter Grace, still stuck with a magnet to the fridge. I set the bags down, took off my coat, and sat at the kitchen table. I stared at the salt shaker for a while. The truth is, I'd been preparing for this moment for years without knowing. There's a silence that builds between people, like dust in corners. You don't notice it until it's thick enough to feel under your feet. Paul hadn't brought up power of attorney since his father died 6 years ago. But he'd hinted, joked about when you can't drive anymore. Suggested I consolidate assets, mentioned a friend who helped his mom simplify things. I always brushed it off with a laugh. But now I wondered what he'd already done, what papers he had, what signatures he'd coaxed out of me while I was distracted by muffins or holidays. And I realized in that moment that I didn't know. I, who had managed every tax return, every doctor's appointment, every bank form, I didn't know. Because I'd started trusting the person who now wanted me gone? No, not dead. Just removed, filed away, managed. A house to sell, a trust to unlock, a bed to clear for something more useful. I opened the drawer by the sink, the one where I kept the old metal box. Inside were all the papers that still had my handwriting, mortgage records, the deed, the living will, the folder marked Paul, college loan paid. I hadn't looked at these in a long time. I poured myself tea, sat down again, read, line by line. I wasn't dying. Not today, not next spring. I had arthritis, yes. My right hip screamed if I stood too long. I had heart medication, bifocals, and a heating pad I called my boyfriend on cold nights. But I still walked unaided, still made the best lemon pie in the neighborhood, still hosted Grace for sleepovers. And I had time. Paul's voice rang in my head again. She won't make it another year. Then I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in years. We'll see about that. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of pain, though the ache in my legs had its usual say. I stayed awake because something had shifted inside me. A quiet, brittle line that had finally snapped. And once it snapped, everything else rearranged. By morning, I'd folded the papers back into the metal box and placed it beside the kettle. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted the weight of it near me while I drank my tea. A reminder that I still held something. Paul called at 9:17. That was normal. He called every Saturday morning, like clockwork. 5 minutes of updates, Grace's soccer, the weather, a quick, "You okay, Mom?" before wrapping up with, "We should plan something soon." It used to warm me. Now it felt like a monthly oil change, scheduled, impersonal, just enough to keep the engine running. "Hi, Mom. How's your morning?" "Cold?" I said, "but the daffodils are trying their best." He laughed. "Tough little things, huh?" I let the silence hang for a second longer than usual. "You doing all right?" he asked. "I'm still breathing," I said. "That counts." He didn't catch the edge in my tone, or chose not to. He talked about Grace's spelling bee, about how Carol was swamped at work, about how he might stop by next weekend, if time allowed. "We're overdue for a coffee, huh?" "Are we?" Another pause. "Well," he said, "you know how life gets." I wanted to scream. "No, Paul, I don't know how life gets, because my life is silence and long mornings and waiting for the phone to ring. My life is watching you drive past without stopping. My life is hearing my name mentioned only when money is due or something needs signing." But I didn't scream. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. The kind of smile you wear when you're done pretending it doesn't hurt. After we hung up, I made a list. Not of groceries or medications or appointments. A list of every time Paul had distanced me, and I'd let him. Thanksgiving, 2022. "It's just too hectic with the kids, Mom. We'll FaceTime." Grace's school play. She'd get nervous if too many people came. Carol's birthday dinner. "We're doing something, just the four of us this time." The surprise trip to Vermont I saw only in Facebook pictures. 4 years ago, I was Grandma Mildred. Then I became Mom. Then just her. I could see it in how they talked about me in front of Grace, as if I wasn't in the room, as if I were already fading. I opened my email, typed Paul's address, then closed it. I didn't know what I was going to say yet, but I would. Not today, not with emotion this raw, but soon. Later that afternoon, I went down to the basement. I hadn't been there in months. The steps creaked more than I did. The old filing cabinet was still there, rusted at the edges. I found the documents from when we bought the house in '78. My name was on everything, mine and Harold's. Paul's name was nowhere. Back upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table again. The sun had moved across the floor, touching the feet of the dining chairs. Paul thought I wouldn't make it another year. I remembered the night Harold died. Paul was 39. He'd held my hand at the hospital, said he'd be there for me. That was the last time he truly looked at me like I was his mother, not his obligation. I didn't want pity. I never had. But I wanted something. A place. A voice. I hadn't realized how long I'd been sitting until the sky outside turned violet. The phone rang again. This time it was Grace. "Grandma, can I come over tomorrow?" "Daddy says we're too busy, but I said I want to see you." "Of course you can, sweetheart," I said. My voice cracked. I cleared it quickly. I'll make those biscuits you like. Yay, I'll sneak out after lunch. Don't tell Daddy. I laughed. Our secret. After we hung up, I looked at the photo on the wall. Me, Harold, and Paul. Taken on the front steps when Paul was 10. He had a gap between his teeth and mud on his knees. Harold's arm was around me. We looked like a team. But teams fall apart when one player stops showing up. That night, before bed, I pulled the metal box into my bedroom, set it beside me like a talisman. I knew what I had to do next. Not for revenge, not even for fairness, for clarity. I'd been living like someone waiting to be erased. That ends now. The next morning, I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept my checkbook and bank statements. It had always been my drawer. Paul never paid attention to it. That was the thing about sons. They forget how much their mothers know, how much they've already handled long before they were born. I laid everything out on the table. Papers in neat piles, dates, totals. Paul's handwriting on some of the envelopes, his name on a few receipts I didn't remember agreeing to. A $3,200 withdrawal marked consulting. A $5,000 transfer to a joint account I didn't recognize. Another for $800, labeled Grace Summer Program, which I had no issue with if someone had asked. But no one asked. I took out the folder labeled Legal. That one I hadn't touched since Harold died. Back then, I'd trusted Paul to help with all the transitions. He was the only child, after all, smart, capable. He brought the papers, told me where to sign. I did. My hands were shaking then, not from fear but from grief. I couldn't think straight, and Paul had been kind, calm, gentle. I trusted him. Now I looked at each document with new eyes. The power of attorney had been updated 3 years ago. I remembered that day. He said it was just routine, that if anything ever happened, it would make things easier. I'd nodded, signed, moved on. There was also a transfer on death deed, something I hadn't paid much attention to at the time. It meant the house would automatically become his when I passed, no probate, no delay. And there it was, my signature, steady, unshaking, witnessed, notarized. It hit me like a cold wind. The game had already been played. My name was still on the mailbox, still on the tax bills, but my control had slipped away the moment I let someone else start managing for my benefit. I felt stupid, old and stupid, and then something else, angry. I picked up the phone and called my bank. The woman on the other end, younger than Grace probably, was polite and cheerful. Yes, Mrs. Wells, we do show Paul listed with financial power of attorney. And what does that allow him to do? Well, depending on the document's scope, it can allow access to accounts, transactions, management of investments, bill payments. Can he sell my house? A pause. Not directly, unless it's specified, but it's possible he can initiate sales or make decisions on your behalf, especially if medical incapacitation is stated as a trigger. Trigger. That was the word. That's what he was waiting for. He didn't want me gone. He wanted me unable, not dead. Just silent. Out of the way. I ended the call. My heart pounded. But it wasn't fear. It was resolve. At noon, Grace arrived with wind in her hair and joy in her steps. She dropped her backpack by the coat rack like she still lived here. I brought brownies. Dad doesn't know I left early. Good, I said, hugging her tight. You're exactly what I needed today. We sat in the sunroom and drank tea. She told me about her classes, her dream of studying marine biology, how she hated the food in the school cafeteria. She was 17, full of everything I used to be: curiosity, energy, big plans. She looked around, smiling at the house like it was a museum of her best memories. "I love this place," she said. "I hope it's still around when I'm older." "It might be," I said carefully, "depending on who ends up with it." She blinked. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, but only for a moment. "Do you know what a power of attorney is, Grace?" She shook her head. "Well," I said, "it means someone else can make decisions for you. If you're not able to." "Oh," she said, looking uncertain. "That's good, right?" "It can be," I said. "If they love you. If they care more about you than what you own." She was quiet for a while after that. When she left, I knew what I had to do. I didn't need confrontation, not yet. I needed facts, documents, clarity, protection. I pulled out the yellow pages. Yes, I still keep them, and flipped to the legal section. Eleanor Brack, estate and elder law. 40 years experience, local, trustworthy. That last word stood out more than anything. I picked up the phone and dialed. "Brack Law Office, this is Eleanor." Straight to the source. I took a breath. "Ms. Brack, my name is Mildred Wells. I think I need to talk to someone who understands what it feels like to be slowly erased by people who say they love you." Eleanor Brack's office was tucked above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and comfort. The stairs creaked under my feet. Narrow, steep, real wood, the kind they don't bother with anymore. When I reached the top, I had to catch my breath, both from the climb and from nerves. The waiting room was small and warm, with 2 mismatched chairs and a table covered in outdated magazines. A plaque on the wall read, "Your story isn't over. Make sure you write the next page." I was already glad I'd come. "Mrs. Wells?" a soft voice called from the hallway. A woman in her 60s, wearing sensible shoes and a tweed blazer, extended her hand. "I'm Eleanor. Please, come in." Her office was nothing fancy. Bookshelves heavy with binders, a window cracked open to let in the fall air, and a framed photo of a large family picnic. I sat down across from her, clutching my purse in both hands. "I don't really know where to start," I said. "Start with what made you call me," she replied gently. So I did. I told her about the grocery store, about Paul's voice in that aisle, about the documents, the transfers, the steady removal of my authority dressed up as concern. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back, her hands folded over a yellow legal pad. "I've worked with a lot of families, Mrs. Wells," she said. "What you're describing isn't rare, but that doesn't make it acceptable." I nodded, grateful for the validation, but hollow inside. "You still have capacity," she continued. "You're clear, decisive, and fully competent. That gives you options. But the sooner we act, the better." She outlined them, one by one. Revoke the current power of attorney. Draft a new will. Create a living trust with protections built in. Secure all major assets, especially the house. Notify the bank, formally, of any changes. "It's not about revenge," she said, as if reading my mind. "It's about making sure your voice is still yours." I stared out the window for a long time. "Is it foolish," I asked, "to hope he once meant well?" "No," she said softly. "But it's foolish to keep giving people access to your life if they're only interested in your exit." I signed the first set of papers that afternoon. The sound of pen on paper felt heavier than it should have, like I was carving something in stone. When I left the office, I didn't go straight home. I drove past Paul's neighborhood. I didn't know why. Habit, maybe. Pain, probably. Their house was bigger than mine, newer, sleeker. No chipped paint or creaky steps. Carol's car was in the driveway. Grace's bike leaned against the side of the garage. It was the kind of house you expected to find a grandmother inside, just not this one. I didn't stop. Back at home, I put the documents in the metal box. That box had become something new now, not a place of memory, but of action, of boundaries, of self-respect. I made myself a sandwich, put on the kettle, and sat at the table like always. But the air was different. There was no fog of helplessness around me now, just clarity. I picked up the phone and called my bank again. "Hi, this is Mildred Wells. I need to schedule an appointment, in person. I'll be bringing a new power of attorney and some trust documents." "Of course, Mrs. Wells," the young woman said. "We can see you Tuesday morning." "That's perfect." As I hung up, the phone buzzed with a message from Paul. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Need anything from the store?" I stared at it for a long time. It was almost sweet. Almost. I didn't reply. I spent the rest of the evening sorting through a lifetime of almosts. Almost invited. Almost thanked. Almost respected. Almost loved, if love means more than obligation. At 10 p.m., I turned off the lights, walked to my bedroom, and closed the door with a soft click. Not slamming, not in anger, just firmly, like someone who had finally remembered what the lock was for. On Thursday, I received a voicemail from Carol. "Hi, Mildred. I hope you're well. We're having a small dinner Saturday night. Just family. Nothing fancy. Thought you might want to join. Paul will pick you up around 6. Let us know." Her voice was sweet, tidy, practiced, but it wasn't an invitation. It was a performance. And it arrived 3 days after Eleanor Brack filed the first set of revocations at the county office. Coincidence? No. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone like it might confess. My tea had gone cold beside me. The smell of toast lingered in the air, untouched. It wasn't the invitation that bothered me. It was that it came too late. As if someone had realized the engine wouldn't start without the key and was now scrambling to find it. Still, I told myself, maybe it's nothing. Maybe they just missed me. Maybe there was guilt. A change of heart. Maybe. At 6:02 p.m. Saturday, Paul's car pulled into my driveway. I watched him from the window. He sat in the driver's seat, looking at his phone, not even glancing toward the house. No flowers, no knock on the door. I opened it myself, coat already on. "Hi, Mom," he said as I got in. "You look nice." "Do I?" I said. "That's a surprise." He didn't answer. Just turned up the heater and backed out of the drive. The dinner was at their house. Carol met me at the door with a glass of wine, her smile wide enough to split her cheeks. Come in, so glad you could make it." The house was warm, well lit, filled with the scent of roast and rosemary. Grace ran up and hugged me tight. "I saved you the seat by me," she said. That part was real. Her hand in mine, her joy. That was always real. But the rest, too perfect, too rehearsed. Carol kept touching Paul's arm. Paul kept pouring my glass before I asked. They both asked questions they never bothered with before. How was my week? Was I sleeping well? Did I need anything fixed around the house? They were circling. I could feel it. At dessert, when the table was cleared and everyone had begun to settle, Paul brought it up. "So, Mom," he said, leaning back like a man trying to sound casual, "Carol and I were thinking maybe we should talk again about the estate stuff. It's been a while, and, with things changing." I smiled. "What's changing?" he faltered. "Well, I mean, you're getting older, and it just makes sense to have everything in place." "I agree," I said, folding my napkin. "That's why I've already made arrangements." Carol blinked. "What kind of arrangements?" "Legal ones. With a lawyer. Everything's handled. Silence stretched like a hairline crack in glass. Paul tried to chuckle. Handled how? I updated my will, revoked the power of attorney, created a trust. Grace knows. Carol's face drained of color. You what? Did you say Grace knows? Paul asked sharply. Yes, I said, because she's the only one who hasn't tried to erase me. The table went still. Carol set her fork down too carefully. Mildred, we were just trying to help. No, I said. You were trying to manage me. There's a difference. Paul's voice dropped. I think this is a misunderstanding. It's not, I said. You stood in a grocery aisle and talked about me like I was already gone. I heard you. He paled. That's not... I'm not sick, I said. I'm not confused. I'm not dying. I'm 78, not 88. And even if I was, I would still be a person, not a piece of real estate. Grace was frozen beside me, her hand still in mine. Carol tried to gather herself. We were trying to prepare. For what? I snapped. For my absence? For my silence? Well, I'm still here. I'm still speaking. Paul leaned forward, his voice low. Mom, we need to be practical. No, I said. You need to be human. I pushed my chair back. Grace stood with me. I'll call a cab, I said. I'd rather ride home alone than be driven by someone who's already planned my funeral. Paul didn't move. Carol looked like she might cry, but I didn't care. In the hallway, Grace helped me with my coat. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be, I said. You're the only one who's done nothing wrong. As I stepped outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one left out of the house. I was the one walking away. The cab dropped me off just past 9. The driver was polite, young, and quiet, the kind of silence I appreciated. When he asked if I needed help to the door, I smiled and said no. My steps might be slower now, but they're still mine. Inside, I hung up my coat, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the center of my living room, staring at nothing for a long time. The house felt heavier than usual, like it had heard everything too. I sat at the kitchen table and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still steady. That surprised me. I thought maybe the confrontation would shake something loose, rattle my nerves, but it hadn't. What I felt wasn't fear, or even sadness. It was something simpler. Relief. I had finally said it. All of it. No more pretending. No more gentle smiles and swallowing pride like dry bread. I stayed up late that night, tidying small things, folding laundry I'd already folded once, polishing silver that hadn't been used since Harold's retirement dinner. I needed movement, a rhythm to work out the tremble still inside me, not in my hands, but in my chest. When I finally lay down, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was clean, like a room just aired out. The next morning, Grace called. Hi, Grandma. Her voice was soft, careful. Morning, sweetheart. Are you okay? Yes. A pause. I didn't know they were planning that dinner without telling you. I swear. I thought it was just a normal get-together. They told me you didn't feel up to coming. I figured they'd say something like that. She was quiet again. I'm glad you came anyway, she said finally, even if it got awkward. It didn't get awkward, I said. It got honest. She laughed, a small, nervous sound. Well, yeah, that too. I leaned back against the headboard, phone warm against my ear. Grace, I said, I need you to know something. None of this is your burden. I've made choices to protect what's mine, but also what might be yours someday. But I don't expect you to pick a side." She was quiet, but I could hear her breathing. "I already have," she said. "I just didn't know it until now." I closed my eyes. That girl, that brave, bright girl. After we hung up, I went to the study and opened the drawer where I'd kept the draft of my new will. Eleanor had offered to file the final version this week. All it needed was my signature. The trust was already active, funded with the bulk of my savings, and assigned with Grace as beneficiary, but not without conditions. She couldn't touch a cent until she was 25, couldn't sell the house until she was 30, couldn't withdraw large amounts without a co-signer unless it was for school or medical expenses. In short, I gave her everything, but I gave it with structure, with protection. Not just for her, but from the people around her, and from herself if life got messy, as it often does when you're young. Later that afternoon, I called Eleanor. "I'm ready to sign the final version," I said. "Come in Monday morning," she replied. "I'll have it on my desk." That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the neighbor's porch light flickered. A cat darted across the lawn. Somewhere, a wind chime played a few lazy notes. I thought about Harold, about how we built this life, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. How we argued over curtains and laughed ourselves hoarse watching dumb sitcoms on the couch. He would have hated what Paul had become. Not because of the money, Harold wasn't sentimental about that, but because of the coldness, the entitlement, the way Paul had started treating family like furniture. I thought about the first time Paul had borrowed money. He was 26, newly married, trying to start a small tech business. I gave him what I had, including Harold's old life insurance payout. He promised to repay it in a year. He never did. I never asked. Then came the down payment on their house, the medical bills when Carol had surgery, Grace's private school tuition. All of it mine, quietly, willingly. I didn't want control, I wanted respect, but I'd traded it for convenience, their convenience, for too long. I sipped my tea and whispered into the dark. No more. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. Finished being tolerated, finished being a ledger entry on someone else's future. Monday, I would sign my name again, but this time, it would be for me. I arrived at the bank 10 minutes early, wore my best coat, the navy one with the satin lining, and pinned my mother's old brooch to the collar. Not because anyone asked me to dress up, because I wanted to. Because for once I wasn't walking in as someone's dependent, but as someone claiming what was hers. The woman at the front desk greeted me with a soft smile. "Mrs. Wells, welcome back. We have you down for 10 a.m. with Mr. Donovan. Right this way." The office was bright and sterile, full of clean glass and muted tones. Mr. Donovan, a thin man with silver-rimmed glasses and sleeves rolled too precisely, stood to shake my hand. "Please sit. We've reviewed the updated documentation from Ms. Brack. Everything looks in order." I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap. "We've revoked Mr. Paul Wells's authority on all your accounts," he continued. "The trust has been activated. We've established your private access codes, and all future transactions will require either your signature or your secondary designee, your granddaughter Grace." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "We've also set alerts on any large withdrawals or attempts to access historical data." "Will Paul know?" I asked. He hesitated. "He may notice the revoked power of attorney when he next attempts access. But he won't be notified directly unless you choose to inform him." "I won't," I said. "Let him learn it the way I learned most things from him, by accident." Mr. Donovan gave a polite, neutral smile. Understood. I signed the papers with a firm hand. No hesitation. When I was done, I stood, shook his hand, and left without looking back. I didn't need to. The rest of the day passed like a slow exhale. I stopped by the grocery store on the way home and bought things just for me. A small wheel of brie, fresh figs, the expensive tea I'd always passed over. And for Grace, a bar of dark chocolate with orange peel, her favorite. It was almost noon when my phone rang. Paul. I let it buzz 3 times before I picked up. "Hi, Mom," he said, too cheerful. "How was your morning?" "Productive," I said. A beat of silence. "Listen," he continued, "I just tried to check something at the bank, just the mortgage status, nothing important, and it said the login was denied." "Do you know anything about that?" "I do." Another silence, longer now. "Okay, is there a reason?" "Yes," I said. "I changed things. Legally." His voice shifted. Tighter now. "Without talking to me?" "You didn't talk to me before assigning yourself to my accounts. I thought we were following that tradition." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're acting paranoid. I was just trying to help." "I didn't ask for help," I said. "I asked for respect. I've always respected you. You talked about me in a grocery store like I was a problem you were waiting to solve." He went quiet. I let the silence stretch. "Look," he finally said, "maybe I said something poorly. Maybe I made assumptions. But you're not being reasonable." "I'm being clear," I said. "There's a difference. You're going to cut me out over one misunderstanding? This isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about a pattern. You've spent years treating me like a relic. Well, Paul, this relic still has a pen and a voice, and I'm using both." He raised his voice now. "This is going to create problems, Mom. You can't just rewrite the family structure because you feel left out. Watch me." I ended the call. My hands weren't shaking this time. Later that evening, Carol called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice tight, brittle. "Hi, Mildred. We're trying to understand what's going on. Paul's very upset. We just want what's best for you. Please, call us back." I didn't. Instead, I made myself a plate of figs and cheese and poured a glass of white wine. Sat on the porch and watched the light fade behind the hedges. The same hedges I'd trimmed myself, with shears older than Paul. I was not being cruel. I wasn't severing ties. I was just stopping the leak. My life was not a faucet for others to turn on and off as needed. I would no longer be managed, not by fear, not by guilt, and certainly not by my own son. As the first stars blinked into the sky, I whispered something only the evening breeze could hear. I remember who I am now, and I'm not afraid of being alone. The next morning, I opened the drawer where I kept Harold's things, an old watch that no longer ticked, a pair of cufflinks shaped like anchors, and a worn leather envelope I hadn't touched in years. Inside was the deed to our first laundromat. "Wells Wash and Dry," painted by hand on the sign by Harold himself, crooked letters and all. I sat at the kitchen table, running my fingers over the paper. That business was never big, never flashy, but it kept us afloat. Paid for Paul's braces, put food on the table during the years Harold's back wouldn't let him do anything but rest. When he died, I sold the shop, but not the memory, and certainly not the lesson. You build things from nothing. You don't wait for anyone to give you permission. I'd forgotten that for a while, but I remembered it now. It was a strange thing, watching your own son grow into someone you wouldn't hire for a job. Paul had Harold's eyes, but not his steadiness. He'd always been charming, knew how to make people lean in. Teachers loved him. So did girlfriends. And when he got his first job in finance, he bought a suit before he bought a coffee maker. "Image is everything, Mom," he'd said once, grinning. And maybe that was the difference. I never cared much for image. I cared about work, about showing up, staying late, making things clean and useful. I thought about the day he came to me with the idea for his startup. It was 2007. He was nearly 40 and still convinced he was about to change the world. He asked for $50,000. "I know it's a lot," he said, "but it's going to take off, I promise." I didn't hesitate. I wrote the check that night, sold my engagement ring 2 weeks later to cover the gap in my savings. I told myself Harold wouldn't mind. "It's for Paul," I said aloud, staring at the empty spot on my finger. The company folded in 9 months. Paul never mentioned the money again, and I never asked. Because that's what mothers do, right? We give. Quietly. Repeatedly. We hand over pieces of ourselves like napkins at a picnic. No one counts how many, just that there's always more. But there isn't. One day, the basket is empty, and no one says thank you. They just ask why it took so long. Later that afternoon, Grace dropped by. "I brought that tea you like," she said, holding up the bag like a prize. "And those cranberry biscuits from the corner shop." I let her in, poured us each a cup, and we sat in the sunroom, wrapped in that gentle silence that only two women with history can share. "I talked to Dad," she said finally. I nodded. "He's confused, maybe angry. I don't know. He's not used to being told no." "That's the problem," I said. "He was raised to believe I'd never say it." Grace looked at me over her cup. "I think he knows," she said, "that you've changed." "Not changed," I corrected. "Returned." She smiled. "To what?" "To myself." We talked for an hour, about school, about her plans, about a boy named Darren who seemed, from her tone, both important and irritating. When she got up to leave, I handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Just some things I want you to have. You don't need to open it now." She held it carefully, like it might break. "I love you, Grandma." "I know." After she left, I sat back down and stared at the place where she'd been sitting. Her warmth lingered. I knew Paul would be calling again soon. Maybe Carol, too. But I also knew something else. This was the first time in years I wasn't afraid of the phone ringing. Let them talk. Let them spin. I had nothing to hide. Nothing to lose. Because what mattered was no longer theirs to take. That evening, I went into the spare room and pulled out the old chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were letters from Harold, birthday cards from Paul when he still called me Mommy, and the recipe box I'd nearly thrown out a dozen times. I pulled out one yellowed card, Harold's favorite, lemon chess pie. I set it on the counter, preheated the oven, and pulled out the ingredients. Because sometimes, the best way to remind yourself of who you are is to do the thing you loved before you forgot what love felt like. As I stirred, I whispered to the room. I gave him everything. And now, I'm taking myself back. The first frost came early that year. I noticed it before the sun even rose. Just a delicate silver tracing across the grass, the hedges, the windowsills. It looked like the earth had been written on overnight, in some language only the cold could read. I stood by the window with my tea, wrapped in Harold's old cardigan, watching the street awaken. My neighborhood doesn't change much. That's what I like about it. Same porches, same mailboxes, same neighbor across the street who waters her lawn even when it rains. But that morning, something did change. I saw Paul's car pull up in front of my house. He didn't get out right away, just sat there, engine running, headlights dimmed. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd leave. Maybe he was only here to look, to see if the woman who used to answer every call was still willing to do so. But then he opened the door. No knock. No warning. He let himself in with the spare key I hadn't yet moved. I stayed in the kitchen, waiting. His footsteps were too familiar, too comfortable. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He didn't even pretend. "Hi, Mom." I nodded. "Paul?" He looked tired. Not in the way work makes you tired, but the way control slipping through your fingers makes you tired. His jacket was too thin for the cold, and his hands were stuffed in his pockets like he didn't know what else to do with them. "I wanted to talk," he said. "I figured." He didn't sit. He paced instead, stopping now and then to look at the mantel, at the old photos, the books still shelved alphabetically. "You changed everything," he said finally. I did. "Why?" I looked at him for a long moment. "You know why." He rubbed his hand over his mouth, exhaled hard. "You don't understand what this is doing. Carol's furious. Grace is, well, she's acting like you're some kind of hero." "I'm not," I said. "I'm just not your asset anymore. That's not fair." Neither was erasing me from my own life. He walked to the kitchen island, leaned against it like he used to as a teenager when trying to charm his way out of trouble. "Look," he said, "maybe I made mistakes. Maybe I didn't communicate things the right way. But I had a plan. We were going to renovate the house, use it, maybe rent it out when you didn't need it anymore. Set up a college fund for Grace. Streamline the family finances. So I'm not dead yet, and I'm already a spreadsheet. That's not what I meant, but it's what you did." He went quiet. His eyes drifted to the floor, then back up. "You should have told me you were going behind my back." "No, Paul," I said. "I finally stopped walking behind you." His mouth tightened. "I built a life, a family, a career. I can't just throw it all into chaos because you suddenly feel, what? Angry?" "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm awake." He blinked. That threw him more than yelling ever could. I stepped closer. "I have given you every penny I could spare. I've rewritten my life to suit your seasons, paid for your mistakes with silence. And what did I get in return? A dinner I wasn't invited to, a phone call I was never meant to hear, and a son who thinks dignity is optional at a certain age." Paul's face changed. For just a second, I saw something real. Regret? Shame? Or maybe just the fear of losing control. "I didn't know how to say I was sorry," he murmured. "You just did," I said. "And now you have to live it." He looked around the room again, like it might change its mind and welcome him. "I should go," he said. "Yes." He hesitated, then pulled the spare key from his pocket. He placed it on the table. Not tossed, not dropped. Placed. Then he walked out the door. I didn't move until I heard the car engine fade down the block. Then I picked up the key, opened the junk drawer, and tucked it beneath a stack of rubber bands and twist ties. It would stay there. Not because I wanted him to use it again, but because I wanted the reminder. He'd been inside. And I let him go. And I didn't break. I had a pie to check in the oven, and a life to finish on my own terms. On Monday, Eleanor called. "Everything's finalized," she said. "The revised will, the trust documents, the property protections, all filed. Grace's role is secure, and the limitations you requested are legally binding." I didn't say anything at first, just held the phone to my ear and let those words settle. Finalized. There was something beautiful about that word. Firm. Done. Not subject to anyone else's edits. Thank you, I said quietly. You did a brave thing, Mrs. Wells, she replied. You didn't just change documents. You changed the shape of how you'll be remembered. After we hung up, I sat by the window with a second cup of tea and the envelope Eleanor had mailed back, my signed copy of the new will. My name on every page, my handwriting across every initialed line. It wasn't a gift to anyone. It was a declaration. Later that afternoon, I drove to the notary's office and submitted one last document. A letter, formally removing Paul from any executor rights. He would no longer have control over my estate, my accounts, or my name. Not now, not later. From the notary, I went straight to Grace's school. I'd called ahead, arranged to meet her in the parking lot between classes. When she spotted me, she jogged over with a smile, her scarf flapping in the wind. "Grandma," she said, out of breath. "What's going on? Everything okay?" I handed her a plain white envelope. "This is for your records," I said. "It's not money, it's information." She looked confused. "Information?" "The trust, the protections, the limitations. Everything that's been done, with your name attached. You're not a beneficiary yet, Grace. You're a steward. That means you carry it forward. You don't spend it. You guard it." Her eyes widened a little. She clutched the envelope to her chest. "I trust you," I said. "But that trust comes with responsibility. If anything happens to me, you don't let them twist it. Not 1 inch." She nodded slowly, like someone absorbing the weight of something too large to carry, but too sacred to drop. "Do they know?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But they will." And they did. That Thursday, Paul called again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom, I got a call from the lawyer's office. Something about the will being updated?" "Yes," I said. "It was. And I'm not even listed?" "No," I said. "You're not." He was quiet for a moment. Then came the laugh, low, bitter. "So this is your punishment?" "No," I said calmly. "This is your consequence. I did everything for this family." "No, Paul. You did everything for control. And when that stopped working, you called it care." "You really think Grace can handle all this?" "Yes," I said. "Because unlike you, she asks questions. She listens. She doesn't assume ownership of things just because she wants them." He scoffed. "You've turned her against us." "No. I've taught her what it means to protect something without owning it." His voice dropped. "This is going to hurt her." "No," I said. "This is going to protect her from having to unlearn the same lessons I had to." There was a silence after that. He didn't hang up, just let the line breathe for a while, as if waiting for something. An apology, a softening, a reversal. But I had no more reversals in me. Eventually, he spoke again. "Well?" I hope it was worth it. I almost smiled. It was. After we hung up, I went to the mantel and straightened the photo of Harold and me on the porch, arms linked, sun in our eyes. We were so young then, so hopeful. He'd laugh at what I'd just done. Laugh, then nod, then pour us both a drink. In the corner of the photo, Paul was barely visible, 4 years old, picking dandelions in the grass. You raise them with your hands, but sometimes they walk away from what those hands meant. Still, I'd done my part. Now, Grace would do hers. I didn't need a legacy. I just needed the truth to be intact when I was gone. And now, it would be. The first call came from the bank. "Mrs. Wells," the voice said, polite but cautious. "We've had an attempted access on one of your closed authorizations. A login attempt under Mr. Paul Wells's credentials." "Did he get in?" I asked. "No," she said. "Your revocation is on file, and the system flagged the attempt. We're required to notify you." "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing." I hung up and made myself a piece of toast. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't angry. I didn't even sigh. It was like watching someone knock on a door they used to own, only to find the locks changed and the nameplate gone. That afternoon, another call. This time from Eleanor. "I've had contact from Paul," she said. Not directly to me. He sent a message through a colleague, asking questions, wondering if any of this could be reconsidered. Meaning undone? Yes, politely worded but pointed. He's trying to feel out where the cracks might be. "There are no cracks," I said. "No," she agreed. "There aren't. But I wanted to keep you informed." I thanked her, then sat in the sunroom for a long while, watching the wind twist the last few leaves off the trees. Paul was testing fences. Not kicking them down, just checking if any would give under a little pressure. That's the thing about people who are used to being deferred to. They don't always attack. Sometimes they just lean and expect the world to shift. But this world wouldn't. The next day, Carol came by. I didn't see her car. She must have parked down the street. She rang the bell twice, the second time sharp. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She looked cold. No coat, just a wool sweater and tight shoulders. She held a shopping bag, something wrapped in tissue paper poking from the top. "I brought the baking pan you loaned us last Christmas," she said. I didn't remember loaning her anything, but I took it. We stood there for a moment, two women in a doorway, both trying not to blink first. "Paul's been upset," she said finally. "He feels cut out." "I know. He's not a bad person. I never said he was." She shifted her weight. "You just did all this without telling him. It felt cruel." "No," I said quietly. "What was cruel was doing everything for years without asking me, assuming I'd say yes, counting on my silence. I think he was trying to protect you. By taking what wasn't his?" Carol looked down. "You're angry," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm not angry anymore. I just remembered what I own, and that includes my time, my name, and my decisions." She held the bag up again, like it might mean something. "Well, here's your pan." I nodded. "Thank you." I didn't step aside. She didn't ask to come in. After she left, I stood in the foyer a while longer. Not sad, not triumphant, just still. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation. I wasn't hoping for understanding. I didn't need to be agreed with. I had made peace with being misunderstood. That night, Grace called. I heard she came over. She did. What did she want? "Control," I said. "Disguised as kindness." Grace sighed. "I'm sorry." "You don't need to be. You're not like them." "I don't know," she said quietly. "They raised me too." "But you listened," I said. "That's all it takes sometimes. To hear what isn't being said. To notice who goes quiet when decisions are made." She was quiet then, and I let her be. "I read through the documents," she said finally. "The trust, the clauses, everything." "And?" "I get it," she said. "I really do. You're not giving me anything. You're giving me a responsibility." "That's right. And I won't let it go to waste." "I know." After we hung up, I looked around the house again. The living room I once thought I'd have to leave. The kitchen where I used to feel like a guest. The hallway where my footsteps used to echo too loud, as if I were trespassing in my own life. Not anymore. This house was mine again. Not because I had the paperwork, because I had the choice. That night, I wrote a letter to Paul. Not an angry one, not bitter. I didn't write it to explain or to convince. I wrote it because some things deserve to be said without interruption. I took out my stationery, the cream-colored set with a soft blue border, and used my best pen, the one I'd had since Harold gave it to me on our 20th anniversary. I didn't rush. I wrote each word like I was laying bricks in a wall I'd never tear down. Paul, by now you know the terms have changed. I won't apologize for that. I've spent too many years apologizing for things I did out of love, only to have that love mistaken for obligation. This isn't punishment. It's a correction, a boundary that should have existed long ago. You're not being excluded. You're being relieved. Of control you weren't entitled to, of decisions you weren't meant to carry, and of an inheritance that was never meant to be automatic. You've built a life, a family, and I hope you keep building it. But do it with your own bricks, Paul. Not mine. You once asked me what I wanted in my final years. I never answered. Not because I didn't know, but because I knew you wouldn't hear it. What I want is simple: peace, autonomy, the dignity of my own decline, if it comes, and the right to choose what pieces of me remain when I'm gone. This letter isn't a door. It isn't an invitation. It's a record, a line in ink that says, I was here, I saw, I knew, and I acted. Mildred. I didn't send it. I folded it, placed it in the back of the metal box behind the trust papers and will. One day, maybe he'll find it, or Grace will, or no one at all. But it exists, and that's enough. The next morning, I woke to rain. Steady, quiet, the kind that lingers all day. I opened every curtain in the house and let the gray light in. Then I lit a candle in the kitchen, not because I needed it, but because it made the room feel more certain, more claimed. I spent the afternoon going through old albums. There was one photo I hadn't seen in years. Paul, maybe 9 years old, sitting on Harold's shoulders, both of them covered in soap bubbles from washing the car. I stared at that picture for a long time. They both looked so proud. That's the part no one talks about when you reclaim your life. You grieve the versions of people that no longer exist. The boy who made you laugh. The man who held your hand. You can't get them back. But you can stop letting their ghosts make your decisions. That evening, I found Grace's old drawings in a folder, stick figures and suns with sunglasses. On the back of one, in her 5-year-old handwriting, she'd written, Grandma is strong like a tree. I held that paper to my chest. Yes, I am. Later, I watched the rain turn to sleet against the windows. I made soup. I lit another candle. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote down my own story, not the facts. Dates, places, legal things. The truth. The soft, hard, bitter, beautiful truth. Not for court, not for family. For me. Where I came from. What I survived. What I gave up. What I reclaimed. No embellishment, no apologies. Just a life, told by the one who lived it. By the time I finished the first page, my hands ached. But my breath came easier. This was my record. Not a legacy. A ledger. Not to be admired, only known. I signed the bottom, Mildred Wells, owner of this life. And I went to bed with no fear of what the morning might bring. A few weeks passed in quiet. Not the silence of neglect, but the kind that follows after a storm has said all it needed to say. Grace visited every Sunday now. not out of obligation, because she wanted to. She brought school papers, stories about her friends, fresh bread from a bakery near her campus. We'd sit in the sunroom for hours, no television, no distractions. Just two women exchanging the kind of conversation that doesn't make noise, but stays in the body for days. One afternoon, she brought a question I hadn't expected. "Grandma," she said, folding the hem of her sleeve like a child again, "what would you have done differently?" I didn't answer right away. There are questions we carry our whole lives without asking, and there are answers we don't find until someone else is finally ready to hear them. "I would have said no sooner," I said, "to the slow sacrifices, to being everyone's safety net while calling it love. I would have learned the difference between giving and disappearing." Grace didn't flinch. She nodded, as if she already knew what it felt like in her own way. "You're not disappearing," she said. "I know," I smiled. But I almost did. Later that evening, she helped me sort the attic, boxes full of life. Harold's old journals, Paul's school projects, bills from the 80s I'd saved for reasons I no longer remembered. We found a crate of cassette tapes, mixtapes. Harold made when we still danced in the living room like fools with nowhere to be. Grace laughed as she held one up. "What's on this one?" "Dust and heartbreak," I said, "and maybe a little Aretha Franklin." I let her keep it, told her to find someone who could still play it. After she left, I sat in the attic a while longer, holding one of Harold's sweaters. It still smelled like cedar and thyme. That kind of smell doesn't fade. It just waits to be remembered. I didn't cry. I just thanked the sweater, the attic, the quiet. That night, I dreamt of my mother. She was hanging laundry on a line, wind in her hair, her hands strong, her back straight. She didn't speak, just looked at me and nodded once, like approval could be passed down generations with a glance. When I woke, I felt full, whole. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, unfamiliar handwriting. Carol. The envelope was thin. Inside, just a single page. "Mildred, I've never known how to speak to you the way you deserve. I was raised to believe that efficiency was love, that planning was care. And Paul? Well, Paul learned that from me. What we did wasn't malicious, but it was blind. And for that, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve to be managed. You deserved to be asked. And seen. Grace sees you. That's proof we didn't fail entirely. I hope you're at peace now. I hope one day we can visit, and it won't feel like a performance, but only if you want that too. Carol." I read it once, then again. Then I put it back in the envelope and placed it in the same box as Paul's unsigned letter. I didn't know what to feel, but I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't rush forgiveness just because someone else had finally gotten quiet enough to hear their own guilt. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you owe. It's something you choose when the wound stops bleeding. And mine had only just scarred. The next morning, I baked 2 pies. One for the neighbor whose son mowed my lawn without asking, and one for the hospice center a few blocks away. I didn't know anyone there, but I remembered what it was like to be surrounded by endings. Sometimes, a pie is the only thing that tells you someone still sees you as alive. I walked both over myself. The cold bit at my hands, but my spine held. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought again of the question Grace asked. What would I have done differently? And then I added the part I hadn't told her. I would have loved myself sooner. Not in the way magazines talk about, not bubble baths and candles and soft music. In the real way. By not apologizing for needing space, by refusing to be guilted into silence, by understanding that love without respect is only performance, and by knowing that a woman doesn't stop owning her life just because she's handed it to others out of habit. I closed my eyes and slept without waking once, because now, even in sleep, I was not afraid of vanishing. Winter settled in without ceremony. One morning, I woke to frost clinging to the window panes like lace, and I knew it had arrived for good. The house creaked in places it hadn't before, but it didn't bother me. Age makes noise. So does truth. Grace brought over a small artificial tree and set it up in the corner of the living room, near the window. She added the same old ornaments we'd used for decades, paper ones Paul made in 3rd grade, a ceramic bell Harold gave me the year he forgot to buy a real gift. "I know it's early," she said, fluffing the branches, "but I thought it might make the place feel like something's still beginning." I smiled. It already does. We decorated in quiet, the radio humming in the background. She hummed along to one of the songs, an old crooner tune, and I felt something strange stir in my chest. Not sadness, not joy. Something else. Something like continuance. She hung a little silver angel near the top and stood back. "Do you still believe in this stuff?" she asked. "Christmas?" "No," she said. "Hope." I looked at her, her clear eyes, her careful posture, her voice that still held youth and the cracks of something older underneath. "Yes," I said. "But not in the way I used to." She sat beside me, cross-legged on the rug like she was 5 again. "I used to hope people would change," I said. "Now I just hope they show themselves clearly enough so I can make the right decision the first time." Grace nodded. "That sounds more like wisdom than hope." "They're cousins," I said. "Distant ones." We laughed at that, soft and close. Later, as she packed up to leave, she lingered by the doorway. "You know," she said, "they still don't understand. Dad and Carol. I think they're trying to, but it's like you did something they don't have a name for." "I did," I said. "It's called drawing a line, and they don't recognize it because I never drew one before. Do you think they'll ever see it the way you do?" "I'm not waiting for them to." She nodded, quiet again. When she left, I watched her walk down the path to her car. She looked over her shoulder once, smiled, then drove off into the early dusk. That evening, I sat by the tree. No lights on, but the ones she'd strung. I ran my fingers over each ornament like a history I was now willing to own completely. Not because it was perfect, but because I had lived it, every inch. Paul hadn't called in 2 weeks. Carol sent one more message, something vague about holiday plans and keeping things civil. I didn't respond. Some things don't need answers. They need endings. And this ending wasn't bitter. It was quiet. Like snow falling over something you've finally put to rest. Before bed, I pulled out the box again. I reread the letter I'd written to Paul, still unsigned, still unsent. I tucked it back in. Then I wrote a new one. Grace, if you're reading this, it means the story has turned another corner. I don't know what version of me you'll remember. The grandma who made pie. The woman who sat at the window too long. The name that kept appearing in paperwork you had to sort through. But I hope what stays is this. I didn't go quietly. I didn't give away what was mine just to be remembered fondly. I lived with my eyes open. And I left nothing behind I didn't mean to give. The world will try to take from you in polite ways. With smiles. With forms. With the language of help. Know the difference between hands that lift and hands that reach to carry what isn't theirs. I trust you. That's why you have the keys now. Not just to the house, to the story, to the fight I finished so you wouldn't have to start it. Love, Grandma. I sealed it and placed it in the box with everything else. And I slept soundly again. Not because I'd won, but because I'd told the truth out loud, and the room had stayed still. I used to wonder what it would feel like, the last season of your life. Not the dramatic version, not the hospital beds and fading breath, but the quiet kind, the real kind. When you're still here, still walking and cooking and putting on your sweater one arm at a time, but something in the air tells you, this is the settling. It doesn't come with a grand announcement. It comes with smaller cups of tea, shorter lists, a deeper understanding of what no longer needs to be said. I don't fear it anymore. These mornings, I wake before the light comes in. I sit in my robe by the kitchen window and listen, not to the clock, not to the creaks in the house, but to myself. There's a stillness I earned, not borrowed, not inherited. Earned. Grace visits every week, sometimes twice. She knows where the spare key is, though now she always knocks first. That alone tells me she understands the lesson better than I ever taught it. Last week, she brought over a draft of a college paper. Ethics and Inheritance, it was titled. She hadn't planned on showing it to me, I could tell. But she left it on the table when she went to make tea, and I read it anyway. It was good, thoughtful, clear. One line stood out. We inherit patterns more often than possessions. Yes, that's what this has been about, hasn't it? Not money, not houses, not papers. Patterns. What we pass down in the silences, in the letting go, in the looking away. I'm not passing that down anymore. This house will go to Grace, yes. But more than that, I want her to inherit the refusal, the backbone, the right to be firm and still good, to say no and still love, to end things before they rot, to protect without apologizing for the lock on the door. Paul hasn't visited since the holidays. He sends short texts, neutral and vague. Hope all is well. I respond when I want to. Sometimes I don't. There is no rule book for how to love a child who grew up into someone who misused your silence, and I'm done writing apologies in margins he never bothered to read. Carol sent a holiday card, typed, signed from the family. No note, no warmth, just paper. That's fine. Some people will never understand the difference between being cut off and being let go. One is a punishment. The other is a release. I chose the second. For them. For me. Today, I folded laundry with the window open. The wind was sharp, but I left it open anyway. There's something about letting in the cold that reminds you you're alive. I made soup. I called my neighbor about her hip. I wrote a thank you letter to the girl who delivers my groceries every Tuesday. I watched the sky change its mind 5 times in one afternoon. And then I sat down and wrote this. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to leave a final word. A closing note that wasn't soaked in regret or performance. Just truth. If you've made it this far, maybe you know what this story really was. Not about betrayal. Not even about inheritance. It was about permission. The moment an old woman gave herself permission to no longer be the one who disappears quietly, to no longer be the good soldier for someone else's plan, to no longer call silence grace. And if you've ever felt what I felt, like time was running out and you still hadn't claimed your name back, then let me tell you something. It's not too late. You don't have to burn everything down. Just stop handing out matches. You don't have to raise your voice. Just stop nodding when they lie. You don't have to make them understand. Just make yourself undeniable. That's what I did. And now I wake up every morning in a house that still creaks, in a body that still aches, but in a life that finally fits. Not because I won, but because I stopped giving away the map. If this story found you at the right time, share it. And if it reminded you of something you've buried too long, write it. Tell it. Live it. We do not vanish. We return.